Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Stevens with a lecture on Twelfth Night. Subtitled here, Some Notes on the Bard's Gender Shakeup. Some people think of Twelfth Night as one of those gender bender things, gender bender plays, dramas. Before we begin, let me point out that picture that accompanies this lecture, and that shows you the two major characters in the play, Viola on the left and Olivia on the right. And that is a still from the Trevor Nunn film production of Twelfth Night, made about maybe 15 or 16 years ago. An excellent film, relatively faithful to the play. I highly recommend it. And I have also posted in the on Blackboard in the course site some clips from that film. So let's get started here. Let me see if I can. Yep, tapping the screen gives me the next slide in this PowerPoint, and we're also going to get some inking tools here, a little bit of blue. Okay. So in the lecture, we are not going to be looking at everything in the play. I do want to look at the plot, not in overall detail at the plot structure, but I want to look at the plot in terms of gender. And so you will become familiar with the plot in general, but as I say, there won't be any particular detail about the plot, and there will be some important aspects of the action that we will not be going over. I'm going to rely on you to get the other details of the action in the play, but because we're going to be looking mostly at those aspects of the plot that relate to gender. Now, Shakespeare wrote poetry. Let me take just a few moments here to remind you that there are, in Shakespeare's time, all the way up to Shakespeare's time, and actually into the next century, it's another 150 years or so before literature becomes anything except poetry. All literature up through Shakespeare's time was poetry. So we look at, in this course, as you already know, we look at lyric poetry, we look at epic poetry, and this, of course, epic is a form of narrative, and we look at dramatic poetry. And that means plays, such as the comedy Twelfth Night that we're considering here. So please keep that in mind. Shakespeare wrote poetry. He wrote narrative poetry. He wrote lyric poetry, that is the sonnets, and he wrote, most famously of all, dramatic poetry, that is the poetry of the plays. We are not looking at that poetry in this particular lecture, but I just wanted to point it out to you. This play is written in verse. It is considered poetry, dramatic poetry. So, let's move along then. It looks as though I'm going to have to do something here. Okay, in order to move to the next slide, here we go. I'm going to have to uncheck the inking tools, and then I'll have to recheck them here. Okay. So, I just wanted to point out that we have some study materials. First of all, there are study notes that go along with this lecture, and by the way, most of the PowerPoint slides in the lecture are taken from those study notes. So the study notes are a good thing to have, especially if you are hoping to review the main points of the lecture. I have also, as I already mentioned, some video clips of Trevor Nunn's film production of Twelfth Night. It stars Helena Bonham Carter as Olivia and Imogen Stubbs as Viola, and of course there are other characters and actors as well. I mentioned these individuals primarily because I think Bonham Carter is pretty well known to American film audiences. Most recently, she had a major role in The King's Speech, which won a bunch of Oscars. She does a fine job in The King's Speech. You might be familiar with her from that. So anyway, take note of these aids to the unit, to the study of Twelfth Night. All right, so moving right along, I want to give you a brief synopsis of the play, and one reason it's brief, and I'm not going to cover all of the action in the play either, but one reason it's brief is that, wonders of the internet, I know that most of my students know how to find information about the works of literature we study. I know that many people are familiar with SparkNotes, No Fear Shakespeare. You can always get a synopsis of the plot, probably a very detailed one, perhaps more detailed than you might want, but from sites such as SparkNotes. What I want to do is talk a little bit about the situation here that we're dealing with in the plot as a whole. All right? So, at the beginning of the play, Viola and Sebastian are siblings. They are twins. And they are shipwrecked. They are on a journey, a sea voyage. So this is the outset of the play. They are on a sea voyage. The ship is wrecked on the Illyrian coast. They are then Viola is saved, but Sebastian apparently has drowned. Viola believes that Sebastian has drowned. I mean, she's convinced of that fact. She has lost the individual who is nearest and dearest to her, her twin brother. And so the situation is that she is determined to try to get information about her brother, whom she believes has drowned. She then disguises herself. This is the first gender bending. Viola becomes Cesario. Now, as Cesario, she attaches herself to the Count Orsino. That is, she becomes one of his staff. All right, one of his men. All right, one of his guys, his gang, his buddies. All right. So as far as Orsino is concerned, Viola is a man named Cesario. Now Orsino is in love with Olivia. Okay? Well, guess what? Again, the situation at the beginning of the play. Olivia has just lost her brother, and when we first see her, we see her in mourning for her brother. She has sworn that she will never attach herself to a man. She will never have anything to do with a man. She will never marry, and this is all out of devotion to her brother. That's the overall situation. What happens is that Orsino uses Cesario as an intermediary, a go-between, if you will, between himself and Olivia. He hasn't had much luck courting Olivia himself, all right? So he figures he will use Cesario to try to plead his case with Olivia. So Cesario then is Orsino's agent in love. So very soon after Cesario, that is Viola, or Viola, that is Cesario, attaches himself, that is herself, to Orsino's court, Orsino asks Cesario to perform this role. Well, guess what happens? Olivia falls in love with Cesario. All of a sudden, all of her vows about never falling in love, never having anything to do with a man, never getting married, are completely forgotten. She has fallen head over heels in love with Cesario, whom, of course, she takes to be a man. This completely baffles Cesario, takes her completely by surprise. Well, you see what's going on here. First of all, we have mistaken gender. That's a major factor here. Cesario, that is Viola, doesn't mistake her own gender. She knows that she is a woman, all right? And we need to mention, the other factor here that's very important that I forgot to mention is that we've got a bit of a triangle here. Orsino is in love with Olivia, and what happens? Okay, Olivia, as I said, falls in love with Cesario. Guess what happens to Cesario? She, that is Viola, falls in love with Orsino. You see, so we've got this little triangle which goes around in one direction only. No reciprocated love. And the gender is mistaken, right? So we begin the gender bending with this fundamental mistake that Orsino sees Viola as a male, Olivia sees Viola as a male, right? And so instead of Orsino and Olivia, who are male and female, being properly attracted to each other, Olivia is attracted to a woman, and Cesario, disguised as a man, is attracted to another man. Ultimately, in the end, what happens, and again, we're skipping over a lot of the action here, but a lot of the action has to do with this back and forth between Orsino, Cesario, and Olivia. But at the end, guess what? Sebastian shows up. He has been rescued from the shipwreck, and of course Viola all this time doesn't know that he's been rescued, but he shows up. Well, they are twins. They are identical twins, except for the gender, of course, meaning they look very, very much alike, so that when Viola, disguises herself as Cesario, well, she becomes a man. So that, in effect, Sebastian and Cesario are twin brothers, right? You guessed it, twin brothers. So when Sebastian shows up, well, he looks just like Cesario, which means that Olivia is completely confused. When Sebastian shows up, she thinks it's Cesario. She's still in love with Cesario, and, well, she falls in love then with Sebastian, thinking that he is Cesario. Sebastian very conveniently reciprocates. Olivia is this beautiful and rich woman. Why wouldn't he reciprocate her advances toward him? So we have this problem of mistaken identity. Olivia falls in love with Sebastian, thinking that Sebastian is somebody else, namely Cesario. All right, so that's brief synopsis. Well, maybe not as brief as I had wanted it to be. Let's talk about comedy. Let's talk about plot in general. The plot of comedy. Twelfth Night is a comedy according to this time-honored formula which goes back to the ancient world, goes back to Greek and Roman drama. All right, and it is still very much alive today in film genres such as romantic comedy. I'm trying to think here of some fairly recent romantic comedies, some famous ones from our own time, of course, Sleepless in Seattle, Moonstruck, some time ago, starring Nicolas Cage and, what's her name, Cher. More recently, a couple of years ago, a very popular romantic comedy based upon the Romeo and Juliet story called Letters to Juliet. So, just some examples that might be familiar to you of romantic comedy, and the formula is very crudely summarized as boy finds girl, falls in love, right? Boy loses girl, something comes along, right? Gets in the way, okay? And then the boy finds the girl again. That is, the obstacles, whatever the obstacles might be to their relationship, are overcome and they get together again. More accurately, perhaps, love begins. Something happens, some obstacle comes along to get between the lovers, so it gets in trouble, and then love triumphs at last. So a comedy, remember this is the basic definition. A comedy is a play with a happy ending. And under this formula, the happy ending is usually the lovers getting married. Now, notice what I haven't said. I haven't said anything about comedy in that other, more familiar sense of humor. Right? Comedies are funny. Well, there is certainly a lot of humor in Shakespeare's comedies, and there is certainly a lot of humor in most romantic comedies. But comedy is not fundamentally simply a funny show, something that causes us to laugh. There is humor, there is lightheartedness, there is laughter, but fundamentally a comedy is a story with a happy ending, usually a love story, although not necessarily always. Let's move along then. Okay. So Shakespeare varies the formula. That's the overall formula. Shakespeare varies it considerably. In this particular case, one variation is that he is contrasting sibling and erotic love. Erotic love would be the love that Viola feels for Orsino, Orsino feels for Olivia, and so on. And the sibling love would be the love between the twin brother and sister. So the original obstacle, you see, remember, something comes along to get in the way of the love, right? Well, the original obstacle is not between boy and girl in the usual falling in love sense, that is the erotic love. The original obstacle comes between two siblings in their separation, right? The brother and the sister. So the original problem is the protagonist's loss of her brother. And by the way, obviously I'm referring to Viola here as the protagonist. That is the main character in the play. Well, we need to follow the way that Shakespeare is varying this formula. All right. So I hope at this point you understand the basic situation. Viola is looking for her information about her lost brother, whom she believes has drowned. In doing so, she disguises herself. She becomes involved in this relationship between Orsino and Olivia. All right? She never intended to become involved the way she does, but while she is looking for her loved brother, she falls in love with somebody else. That is, she falls in love with Orsino, and lo and behold, Olivia falls in love with her, or him, depending upon how you want to look at the whole gender thing. So that's the overall situation. It's a romantic comedy. One variation here, the important variation, is the way this particular romantic comedy begins. And it begins not with the interruption of love between the usual boy, girl, man, woman, but the interruption of love between brother and sister. So, let's look at the main action of the plot. The plot springs from Viola's loss of her brother. Oh, we got to go back. How are we going to do this? All right, there we go. All right. So the plot springs from Viola's loss of her brother. This is where it begins. What sets the action in motion, and this is important thematically, what begins the whole action that takes place during the play is her disguise, her transformation into a man. So she assumes the role in order to get information about her brother. All right. Okay. And then to get as close to somebody else, I should have mentioned this. She can't, as Cesario, offer her services to Olivia in hopes of getting information about, not information about her brother, but getting close to somebody who has also lost a brother. So what she does is she attaches herself to Orsino, but she attaches herself to Orsino in order to get close to somebody else who has lost a brother. All right. Sorry I didn't make that clear earlier, but that's what's going on here. All right. Olivia wants information about her brother. She also wants to be close to somebody who is suffering the same thing that she is suffering. All right? So the main action of the play, the main action as opposed to the situation that sets the play in motion, is the more traditional love affair. But there are two of them. Shakespeare, his comedies, involve two pairs of lovers. That's another major variation. And the traditional love affair in this case is unrequited love, that is not returned, in the form of a love triangle. As I've already mentioned, Orsino loves Olivia, Olivia loves Cesario, Cesario loves Orsino. All right, moving along then. Wait a minute. Orsino loves Olivia? Who loves Cesario? Who loves Orsino? Orsino loves Olivia, who does not love him. That's a basic comic situation. That is a situation in romantic comedy. And so the traditional stock formula would deal with that unrequited love as the obstacle. Okay, Orsino in this case, or one lover has to overcome the fact that the love is not returned, and somehow that happens. All right, that's how the plot is worked out. The plot is worked out so that somehow that obstacle, the unreturned love, is overcome, and the lovers are finally united. But this is not what happens in this particular play. All right? What happens in this particular play is somehow we've got to attach the right people to each other. Okay? If Orsino loves Olivia and Olivia loves Viola, thinking that Viola is a man, all right, we cannot simply have Orsino somehow overcoming Olivia's resistance. You see? I mean, that would be the normal pattern. Somehow Olivia's resistance or Orsino would be overcome and they would be united in love. But then what happens? All right? What happens to Cesario? The Cesario is left hanging, isn't she? She. right? Because Viola, that is Cesaria, or Cesario, that is Viola, still loves Orsino. So how are we going to reconcile that? All right, if we bring Orsino and Olivia together, poor old Viola is left twisting in the wind without any lover. That is, the obstacle to her love has not been overcome. So something has got to happen. So what have we got here? Olivia loves Cesario. Cesario is actually a woman. All right, so that's not going to work, is it? All right, we cannot resolve that particular obstacle, because there's no way that Cesario is going to become a man so that Olivia can be united with her, and Cesario loves Orsino. See, so we can't have Orsino hooking up with Olivia because that leaves Cesario out. So a woman loves somebody she thinks is a man, and a woman disguised as a man loves an actual man, so that outwardly we see a man, Cesario, falling in love with a man while becoming the object of a woman's infatuation. And emphasis on infatuation, because this is an important factor in this triangle. Orsino is infatuated with Olivia. Olivia is infatuated with Cesario, that meaning that there is something missing in that attachment. Infatuation means that you have an attachment to somebody that is really beyond reason. It's an obsession, but it's not really genuine love. So the question is, how are we going to make this all genuine? Let's see if we can work this out as we move along. Let's look at disorder or misrule. What has happened then in this situation is a disordering of proper relations. Olivia's love for Cesario cannot be consummated, right? Viola's love for Orsino cannot be consummated unless she stops being a man and becomes a woman again. All right? She recognizes this disguise as a wickedness that prevents her from fulfilling the relationship with Orsino that she would like to have. So we have a form of disorder, or what is an important element in much comedy is called misrule. Things are ungoverned. That is, they are being ruled, if you will, incorrectly, misruled. How is order restored? Okay. All right. We need to jump ahead here to the resolution of the plot. What happens? If you've read the play, you know what happens. Or if you've watched that movie, which is perhaps even better than reading the play, then you know what happens. We've got this impossible triangle that I just outlined for you. There's no way that these relationships can work out, for the simple reason that there are three people in love with each other, and that's not going to work. You have to have a fourth. And the fourth is Sebastian. So, Sebastian shows up, and Sebastian takes the place of Cesario. All right? So, in this way, Olivia can have, quote unquote, Cesario, who has really prepared the way for Olivia to fall in love with the proper person, that is the proper twin, all right, Sebastian. And when Sebastian shows up, he and Olivia become united. They get married. right? And so what does that do? That frees Cesario to become Olivia again. Okay? So Cesario becomes, not Olivia, I'm sorry, Viola. And Viola can marry Orsino. So Sebastian then becomes the key figure here in the resolution of that problem. Okay? So you see a rather complicated variation on that old formula where we have this triangle. Triangles are supposed to be stable, but in fact this one is very unstable because of this gender bending thing. All right? So Sebastian shows up and stabilizes things by providing, number one, by providing the proper mate for Olivia, and number two, by releasing Cesario from Viola's disguise so that Cesario becomes Viola again, and so on. All right, so let's have a look at what I'm saying here. The central problem is of restoring the proper order of relationships. Men are supposed to love women, and vice versa. This order cannot be restored at first because of that triangle, right? Triangles are rigid structures. They cannot be bent. All right? So the derangement in this triangle cannot be properly arranged without transforming the triangle into that square. And this is done by supplying the fourth person, the missing brother, Sebastian. When he shows up, he can take over the role that his sister, that is Viola, has created for him by proxy, meaning that Viola has acted in effect in place of Sebastian, or has acted as the mate that Olivia really needs. Okay, and that frees Cesario to become the woman, and finally frees Orsino from his obsession with Olivia so that he can love Viola. All right? So, there's more to be said here. There's more to be said. That's basically what happens in the plot. But bear with me for a few minutes longer because we need to look at this whole question of gender and sexuality. All right, so Olivia falls in love with Cesario thinking he is a man. But is this in fact what happens? Here comes the question of sexuality. Olivia thinks consciously that she's falling in love with a man. Is the successful illusion of Cesario's manhood, quote unquote, right? Is it the successful illusion that explains Olivia's infatuation with Cesario, or does she in fact fall in love with another woman, Viola, only thinking that she's in love with a man? In other words, is Olivia really responding erotically to the woman rather than, as she thinks, to a man? And there are moments when a director could stage the play to suggest that what Olivia responds to is not Cesario's manhood, but his, quote-unquote, femininity, because, of course, beneath that disguise, Cesario is fundamentally feminine. So this is a question. This is a question. I am not trying to argue that the play is arguing that Olivia is really is really homosexually, if you will, attracted to Viola, thinking that Viola is a man. I'm simply saying that the play is raising this question. Okay, where is the sexuality here? Because it gets a little funny. All right? Why would she become so infatuated with this woman who is simply disguised as a man? Let's move along with this question. Same thing with Orsino and Cesario Viola. The same can be suggested of Orsino's response to Cesario. Presumably, because he assumes Cesario is a male, Orsino is not conscious of any sexual attraction, right? But is it possible that Shakespeare is suggesting that the attachment that the Duke does form to Cesario, for this boy, has an erotic aspect? That is, that Orsino is, again, homosexually attracted to what he thinks is a boy. Perhaps the Duke instinctively, if unconsciously, senses that his new friend is a woman. Okay, perhaps he is attracted to Cesario for that reason. All right? Or perhaps he is subconsciously attracted to the male figure, even though it's an illusion, right? Okay, only a suggestion that the play seems to be making, but even though it might just be a suggestion, it is not insignificant, because, as I said at the outset, this play is playing with the whole idea of sexuality and gender. Let's look at it this way. Madness and fools. Everyone in the play is, in some sense, a fool. Olivia is fooled by a woman disguised by a man. Is fooled by a woman disguised as, as a man. Orsino loves fool. He calls himself that, right? Okay, he is fooled by Cesario. Right? He thinks Cesario is a man. Cesario is not. Viola is fooled into falling in love. She thinks that her primary attachment is to Sebastian, and that is what motivates her. But that's not, in fact, what happens. She is fooled into love. But note that sanity is restored when the three main characters find their proper roles, loving partners of the correct gender. All right. Now, we haven't talked about Feste. He's very important. In the movie version that I've referred to, he is played beautifully by Ben Kingsley, all right, whom I'm sure many of you know, if not all of you. All right. Feste is the fool. Pay attention to Feste as you read, and especially, of course, if you watch that movie. But Feste is the nominal fool, that is, a fool in name. That's his job. Okay, he has the comic role. The fool is the person who's supposed to keep people laughing, right? But Feste is, in fact, the wisest of them all. We're not going to talk a lot about Malvolio. Malvolio is the genuine fool. He is of the servant class. He's a very, very high-ranking servant. He is Olivia's steward. We don't really have time to go into Malvolio, but he is really the genuine fool in the play. And let's keep moving here. Let's look at the moral center. Viola, for all her frustration, is the moral center of the play, because she is the one in whom the proper relationship between a man and a woman is protected. She does not fall in love with a woman thinking that the woman is a man, right? She falls in love as a woman with a man. And so that proper relationship is protected in Viola so that it might finally be restored at the end of the play. So she's the center, the hub, that prevents the wheels of love and gender from flying apart. because unlike Olivia and Orsino, she never falls in love with the wrong person, as does Orsino. All right? He really isn't meant to be attached to Olivia, okay, or to the wrong gender as Olivia does. But let's get back to that homoerotic theme. So what of the play's obvious homoerotic overtones? That is, the suggestion that Olivia is attracted to Cesario because she's really attracted to the woman beneath the disguise, that is, a woman being attracted to a woman. And then also the overtone, the suggestion that Orsino might be homosexually attracted to what he thinks is a boy, right? It is helpful to think of this as belonging to a category of things that are always at the center, if beneath the surface of all comedy. Whoops, sorry about that. Of all comedy. And that is this category that we've already mentioned as disorder or misrule. Disorder takes many different forms in comedy. One of the most common being misrule, the type of farce in which roles are reversed, as in Shakespeare's Henry IV, Part 1, when the knight Sir John Falstaff pretends to be the king. The disorder in Twelfth Night is the confusion of gender roles. Such confusion is caused by the general confusions all humans suffer about individual identity. And we all wrestle with this question at one level or another, at one time or another in our lives. Who are we? Moving along then, that question of who we are includes, very important, that question of who we are sexually. We are not always sure of who we are, and nowhere is our individual identity more challenged and vexed than in our sexuality. There is something of the feminine in a man. I hope nobody will disagree with that. We all talk about how there is the feminine side, right? And there is something masculine in a woman. That is the woman's manly side, if you will. We learned to insist that we are male and female, but the very insistence tells us that we are never completely sure. There are moments when we wonder. So we breathe a sigh of relief in situations such as when we fall in love with somebody of the opposite sex, which means that our sexual personae are accepted. All right. I've got this persona of being a man. I've got this persona of being a woman. Oh my goodness. So somebody of the opposite sex has fallen in love with me. That confirms my persona, right? So just as we breathe a sigh of relief at the end of Twelfth Night, when Olivia stops chasing another woman and gets hooked up with a man, Sebastian. So along with behavioral norms, society creates norms of identity, and it maintains order by imposing those norms on the individual, and those norms include the norms of sexual identity. Notice, folks, that I am not talking about what in our own day is a rapidly growing acceptance of homosexual identity. All right? I'm talking about traditional identity and, in this case, traditional sexual identity. The day may very well come when homosexual identity, that is, gay people's attraction to people of the same gender, the day may come when that becomes a norm, that is, a normal sexual identity, but not in the world of Twelfth Night. So, underneath this riot, whoops, okay, underneath this riot that threatens to break out, when someone feels that he or she may not be the person society insists on, right? Okay? There is this riot that breaks out when we're concerned, well, maybe we really aren't who we pretend to be or who we think we are. And such a riot is going on in Twelfth Night, in the scenes in which Olivia throws herself at Cesario, right? It takes place in a strange and melancholy form when Viola is nearly distracted at not being able to declare her love for Orsino. Okay, and she tells him very poignantly, I am all the daughters of my father's house and all the brothers too. All right? We're not looking at that scene, but it's worthwhile. It's, I believe, in Act 3. I'm sorry I don't have the specific citation for you. All right, we're coming to an end here, folks. Sexual uncertainty. If Twelfth Night plays with sexual uncertainty, we might ask whether Shakespeare is challenging the heterosexual norm. It is certainly possible that in Twelfth Night he is using that gender-bending sexual... Whoops. Okay. I'm sorry. Here we go. All right. It is possible that he is using the gender-bending sexual disguise as a covert way, that is, hidden or secret way, of endorsing homoerotic relationships. Look, there were gay people in Shakespeare's time, just as there are today. All right? So that is certainly a possibility. That is one possible interpretation of the play. But do we need, in order for the play to work, do we need to see it as an endorsement of homosexuality? We could also argue that there is nothing at all hidden about the fear and confusion over personal and sexual identity, right? I've already mentioned this. There's nothing hidden about that. We all know about it, because we are all, to some extent, sexually ambiguous. We are all, both genders, mixed, meaning a woman has a little bit of the man mixed in her, a man has a little bit of the woman mixed in him, right? So another possible interpretation is that Twelfth Night can be enjoyed as an affirmation of sexual and romantic norms. Now remember, I'm talking about the accepted norms of Shakespeare's day. So finally, we breathe a sigh of relief at the possibility that Shakespeare is showing us the madness that results from confusion over sexual identity. Oh my. Keep losing my slides here. Sorry about that, folks. He is showing us the madness and that what he expects from us. He expects a collective sigh of relief when the norms are restored, at least for the time being, in the joyous double wedding of Viola, right, Cesario plus Orsino, and Olivia plus Sebastian, Cesario, Viola. Notice that I've kept the bent part of the gender relationships here, because we need to keep those in mind. I think we're at the end. So the social order that is confirmed in the play's finale is radically conservative. Stewards have no business pursuing countesses. This is the Malvolio part of the plot that we didn't go into, right? So, Twelfth Night, once the madness is over, people marry people of the opposite sex, and, by the way, they also stay in their own social class. Steward remains a servant. He does not marry an aristocrat. Oh, so I guess that was it. Let me get back to the PowerPoint slideshow. Okay, here we go. I guess that was our last slide, folks. Well, that was 50 minutes worth of listening to Dr. Stevens on the subject of Twelfth Night and the comedy, trying to outline the relationships among the characters and trying to deal a little bit with some of those gender-bending themes. I thank you all for listening. Please, if you have further questions about this, bring them to the discussion forum. I will see you online and we'll talk further about this wonderful play.